I'm going to start with a definition. So with that said, I'm going to start presenting. By popular demand, people have asked to wait for questions until after the presentation is over. So I'm going to ask people to do that because that's what past guests have wanted. And so we're going to do that. And then before we start the Q&A, our moderator and timekeeper volunteer Margot is going to give an announcement. So for now, though, I'm just going to say exactly what Sejong said, that he's keeping an open mind. I recommend everybody keep an open mind. I like to say when you admit you're wrong with good judgment, you're immediately right again. You're just more right than you were before. And I think a lot of you talked about definitions tonight, and I think you're going to find, if you agree with my presentation, that this is a war of definitions. It's not a war of beliefs. I think actually both the right and the left have the same beliefs, and what we need to do is define what we're talking about in a way that's consistent. And if we do that, then I think we all agree. And I'm going to argue all the people I know that have criticized DEI actually agreed with what I learned DEI was when I researched it, which I find very fascinating. And this is where Wittgenstein, I think, has a good point that communication is not working very effectively. So DI has come up under fire. And to be fair, there are a lot of criticisms of DEI that sound like valid criticisms of unjust behavior. And the question is, does that mean we should have no efforts to prevent discrimination whatsoever and simply leave it all to the free markets? Or is there a middle ground that aligns with being fair, which is part of the first intention of the FTI, which are the five values we all aspire to be as FTI members? And the first one is to be our best self, to seek truth, and to be fair. And so hopefully we're all here to seek truth, which requires listening with an open mind, and to be fair. And I would argue that there is a middle ground of being fair that should be supported by both liberals and conservatives alike. And I'm going to try to make a case that there is liberal ground, and let me know what you think in the Q&A portion. So DEI is basically a set of organizational strategies designed to promote fair treatment, full participation, and a sense of belonging for all individuals, especially for those historically underrepresented or marginalized groups, but not exclusively for them. It's for everybody, including them. And the reason that they're called out specifically is not because it's only for them, it's because they're the people that have often been left behind and not felt like they were part of the group. So I will have and basically I have a set of uh, links here. I'm going to try to put in the chat about where I got this definition. This is the definition we're going to be going with tonight. So it's short and sweet, but I hope it's still tangible and meaningful. You know what? I'm not going to be able to do it's too long. There's like nine different sources. So let me just share the link. Guys, remind me in the Q&A to share the link if I don't do it by default, but I'll share the link to the presentation, which includes the slide notes. Um, all right. So um, going into a little bit more detail, diversity and defining these diversity, equity, inclusion one at a time. Diversity is basically an increase in representation of individuals from various backgrounds, including different races, genders, ethnicities, sexual orientations, abilities, and cultures. So it's not just about race, it's not just about gender, it's about all different ways of looking. And it really is, I think actually I'm going to sort of correct my own definition on the fly. It's not about it's about an equitable representation, and we'll talk about that in terms of equity. And so equity is about ensuring fair access to opportunities, resources, and advancement for all individuals, while actively identifying and eliminating barriers that have led to unequal outcomes in the past. Inclusion is about fostering a culture, and all these I can put in the chat because these are definitions and really important. So I'm going to put all of these in the chat. Um, and I'm not going to be able to see anything in the text. So Margot, do me a favor if you can follow the text. And if there's something that I didn't mention that is an important thing to bring up when we get to the Q&A. Shoot, did that make my screen go off for you guys? Hold on one
It did
second.
for me.
Yes.
It's
Hang on.
gone. Screen's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I
gone.
don't see ya.
Hold on one second. My that was my monitor. It very rarely does that, but it did right there. So, all right. So back again. So equity is basic.
Doggies,
What's that? So equity is
doggies.
can shoot. Why is okay? You know what? I forgot to. I know what it is. Wasn't what I thought it was. Um, bear with me. This is a Zoom bomber. So if any of the people I made co-hosts can help, feel free. Just take a look at who's the offending party and try to boot them and report them and mention their name and bear with me 1 second. I need to. Okay. So I forgot that Zoom hid a certain feature in a really stupid way. I am regularly criticizing Zoom's product managers because they've done some really stupid stuff and they made it easy for Zoom bombers to Zoom bomb and hard for hosts to catch them. So that problem should be fixed. The screen shouldn't go black again. Oh, I guess I was wrong. Um, so we have to figure out what this is. And I will again say that Zoom is really stupid. Um, Oh, that wasn't polite. Look, I caught myself. But it is kind of annoying to have someone that thinks that Zoom bombing is a fun thing to do, disrupting everybody's evening. We have 56 people here, and um, Carl, can you keep an eye out for the Zoom bomber?
Yeah, no problem.
Oh, there. I did have a setting wrong, so that was my fault. Let's try this one more time. So, inclusion is fostering a culture where all individuals feel respected, valued. Guess that wasn't it. Um, interesting.
Actually, is there anybody who has double monitors? Because
I
I
do.
when you have I mean anybody else the co-host, because when you're on sharing screen, I don't really see the gallery, and so if there's a Zoom bomber, I won't be able to find it real quick.
You can drag the gallery across, Carl. If you go to the gallery view, you can sort of
Right,
drag it across so you can just see the gallery.
right, but then I won't see the presentation,
Well, for a minute, it's probably worth, yeah.
or maybe nobody's going to see the presentation.
Garrett, can you completely lock the meeting? Nobody can share, nobody can enter.
Um, I don't
Actually,
know.
that's a really good idea, because like you could say on the details on the meetup page that the lecture starts at 4 sharp, and if you don't make it by 4, you can come into the meeting. I don't know. That seems like a good idea.
It's a bit late now, though, if the Zoom bombers are already here.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
problem.
but let's see if locking it prevents this. So inclusion is fostering a culture where all individuals feel respected, valued, and integrated into the organizational environment. See, it doesn't prevent that. It's interesting because I went to whiteboard. I don't understand how it
It might be some other tech
oh,
fault, Garrett. It might not actually be the
I
Zoom
got it.
bomber.
No, I know what it no, it's not a tech thing. It's definitely a Zoom bomber.
I was just thinking, if worst came to worst, I guess you could just read it
Oh,
out.
you know what? I think I might have I can put the slides in the chat and then if you're right, if worst comes to worst, I can put the slides in the chat and then do it that way. Duh, 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 duh. Oh, yeah, I missed a setting. So let's try this one more time. And this is what I mean by like Zoom has bad product managers because this shouldn't be so hard to figure out how someone is Zoom bombing, right? There should be easy settings that you can just press one button and it locks down the meeting. So I'm gonna put the slides in the chat and you can follow along with the slides in the chat.
And the main so deep, you know I'm
Jonathan.
Yeah.
Bogey.
It's like a game.
Actually, I just realized that if you're on the speaker mode, right, as soon as somebody starts speaking, it goes on huge on the screen. It takes over the screen, so you can know exactly who it is just from the sound.
Good. Well, let's catch that faster next time then.
Yeah.
So, and I'm gonna try it one more time because we just knocked out two Zoom bombers, and we'll see if it works. Um, so, uh, feeling respected, valued, and integrated into the organizational environment, enabling them to fully participate and contribute. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about something philosophical called Rawls Veil. And so it's at the core of DEI efforts and goals. So, philosopher John Rawls introduced the concept of what he called the veil of ignorance, which is now commonly known as Rawls Veil. It's a central element in his theory of justice. It's a thought experiment, which basically says design the principles of a society without any knowledge of your own personal characteristics or social status. By doing this, his belief was, and I believe it's true, that people will choose fair or impartial rules. All right, we still have one Zoom bomber. At least one. I'll put the slides in the chat and so just follow along. Can you guys see the slides? Let me see if I've shared them. Are you guys able to
It
see the slides?
it worked for me.
The slides worked?
Yeah, clicking the link did.
Okay, good.
I
Then
just sent a message, Garrett, to
Joella, can you turn your camera on real quick? Okay, if you don't turn your,
I am driving at the moment.
can you just turn it on real quick so that we can see you?
I'm driving. Yeah. So I'm here. Hold on. Visit during the pandemic. And that was a whole nother fight because from the emergency room, they wanted to admit him, but they wouldn't let me. They were saying because of COVID. And I was like, well, they were like, well, we're not letting
All right,
visitors
thanks.
come. I said, I'm not a visitor, I'm his caregiver. They were like, you would still, they see that as a visitor.
All right, I'm gonna put you on mute, Joella. You can turn it off. Thank you. Um, all right, so let's just go through the slides. Each of you all say when to go to the next slide. And so basically, we're on Rawls Veil. So basically, the veil of ignorance basically says create the rules of society without knowing who you like, what your personal characteristics or social status are. And Rawls basically felt people would be fair because everybody wants to be treated fairly, and you don't know whether or not you're going to be part of a group with an advantage or without an advantage. So inherently, we would all rather create a more fair society. And he felt there were two primary things that everybody would have. And you'll see why I'm talking about this as I go through the presentation. One is equal basic liberties, that everyone should have an equal right to the most extensive basic liberties compatible with the liberties of others. And then two is the difference principle, which is social and socioeconomic inequalities are to be arranged so that there's the greatest benefit to the least advantaged members of society, meaning if you grow up poor, you have some advantages over someone who grows up wealthy, which sort of makes sense. Now, attached to positions in offices open under all conditions of fair equality and opportunity. So by employing the veil of ignorance, Rawls was basically trying to establish a framework where societal rules are crafted without favoritism, leading to a more just and equitable society. Boiled down, very simply put, if all of that sounded like nonsense, we want to make social rules based on fairness rather than on what's in our own best interest. Because behind Rawls' veil, we don't know what our own best interest is because we're forgetting about what position we're playing in society. And so that's the idea behind Rawls' veil. Now, let me move this. Okay, now we're going to the next slide, which is diversity defined. So I'm going to define diversity, equity, and inclusion one at a time. So diversity is simply an effort to ensure all qualified candidates have an equal opportunity in the hiring process. Note that doesn't mean an equal chance in being hired. It simply means that they have an equal opportunity in the hiring process. What does that mean in reality? So we're going to give a tangible example to prove the point about what diversity is and what it is not. So let's suppose that in a country there are 10,000 talented and capable senior software engineers, and 3,000 are women and 7,000 are men. Now, by the way, in reality, there are probably actually 100 of those individuals that are intersex, meaning have both male and female genitalia. But let's not go down that rabbit hole. We'll keep the example to a simple to demonstrate the point. So in this case, a company hiring senior developers would look to hire talented and capable people who are at least 30% women in general. Now, if you're close, it's considered fine, right? It's only if you have, 5% or less women, then suddenly that looks a little suspicious, like there may not be fair hiring practices when there are 10,000, equally talented and capable senior software engineers and 3,000 are women. Now, let's suppose there are another 5,000 untalented and incapable women who apply to senior software engineer roles, but not talented and capable. It does not change the fact that the company will still target 30% of its workforce to be women. It's only when someone is talented and capable that they're considered to be a part of diversity. And diversity does not mean an equal number of people. It means an equal percentage of the talent pool across a wide variety of areas. So essentially, what this boils down to is given the law of large numbers, which I'm not going to go into in a lot of detail, but the only way you can not be following diversity is if you're being, racist, sexist, etc., or hiring based on things that are actually illegal to hire along. So DEI is not doing anything but enforce the law more or less, and maybe add a few other things like socioeconomic, etc. Now, it's really that's really all that it's doing. And this is actually it's very hard to prove that someone is discriminating in a lawsuit. It's much cheaper to simply do the right thing rather than get into the lawsuits. And so companies practice the diversity in DEI to avoid lawsuits for illegal discrimination, not to discriminate against groups that were historically in positions of power. This means that actually groups that were historically favored will no longer be given preferential treatment that we had in the past, but it does mean that groups such as white men like myself might no longer have an advantage because of how we were born. Now, under Rawls' veil, we should all focus on being fair to everybody rather than seeking the most advantage we can for ourselves, and that's really what DEI aims to do. In fact, if you can show a more qualified candidate than someone else was chosen for a role, and that you simply were not hired because one of the areas that protected you from because of discrimination, even if you're a white male and you were discriminated against because you were a white male, and someone chose a diversity candidate who was less qualified, you have a viable lawsuit on your hands for discrimination. So discrimination lawsuits protect everyone, including people who were historically advantaged. So that was news to me when I did the research for this, and I thought was very interesting and shows why, um, you know, why, why I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So next, I'm going to go into equity. So I like, oh shoot, I forgot I had a better slide for equity. I'm going to do a quick screen share and show it. Um, So let's see if I can do this. So equality basically says all three of these boys get the same box. Equity, yeah. So can you see who's screen sharing or who's messing with the I don't think
There's no way of telling.
there's no way of telling. See, this is another Zoom failure, right? Like, what can I say? Zoom needs better product managers. I'm just gonna have to do with
You
them.
can describe the graphic. I once described that same graphic. I'm very familiar with it.
Yeah. Let me
Can't you just turn off screen sharing for everybody except you?
I did, except for co-hosts. It's not that they're screen sharing because they're not stopping my screen share. They're doing something else. And I'm not quite sure what. Otherwise, I would have shut it off now. Um,
Is it the whiteboard?
I thought it was, but I changed the whiteboard settings and I changed them to what blocked them the last time. So, it's a little strange. So what I'm going to do is put a link to this graphic in the chat. I just forgot to get it into the and I'll share it.
I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. Clyde, you're woke.
Oh,
If
Samuel.
only he was a better singer, I would have let him stay. But unfortunately, he needs to take singing lessons.
These people think they're hilarious, dude.
Well, he wasn't wrong. Science shows that you need to move more during the day for your health.
It's true.
That is true.
I do need to move it. I appreciate that he gave me that thoughtful reminder, but it was a little rude. So the way that he did it. So if you look at the graphic, you can see that I put in the chat. You can see equality is basically three different sized boys standing on equal sized ladders in front of a fence, and two can see and one cannot see because he's too short. Equity gives the short one two boxes to stand on, the tall one no boxes to stand on, and the one in the middle one box to stand on, and they can all see equally well over the fence. Then the reality is one person with one box who can see over the fence, and then another person with like eight boxes that's standing way over the fence. And so basically what this is trying to say, let me just go back to my slide notes.
George Ketzler touches little boys, and we know it. And don't mock my singing. I have
Oh, that's Chris
beautiful
Wood.
voice.
We'll just talk over him.
Garrett, I have screens and I'm a pretty good cop at hitting this stuff fast. Do you want to make me co-host? There's a lot of people here that know me, so they can vouch.
Yes, I trust you.
Okay.
You've been on video the whole time, so
I can't believe how many of them there are.
yeah,
I haven't been to a Zoom
they're
to a
very
Zoom meeting
coordinated.
in a long time.
Yeah, no, they're very coordinated.
Well, I think that the subject matter attracts people that are
Trolls,
not that
yes.
thoughtful.
Oh,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah. So, but it's as was said during the social portion, it's so important that we talk about this stuff because there's so much misunderstanding, and hopefully people have already seen some areas where they may have had misunderstandings so far. I'm hoping that people have. Now, behind Rawls Veil, if we want to be fair to everybody, then we wouldn't be treated equally. We would be treated with equity, and it's basically recognizing that things haven't always been fair and trying to make them more fair. That does, again, it doesn't mean equal for everyone. It means equitable for everyone, meaning giving everyone what they need to have an equal shot based on their talent and work ethic. Now, we want to ensure that there's fair access to opportunities, resources, and advancement for all individuals while actively identifying and eliminating barriers that have led to unequal outcomes. So one of the areas that I think the Supreme Court did a good job is pointing out lack of equity, but more of a focus on equality, something that history.
That's Terry. That's annoying, Terry.
So, the Supreme Court, so I think they did a great job of saying that race-based affirmative action was not fair because it essentially became reverse racism to try to help achieve equity with reverse racism. And I think while they were well-intentioned, they were while they were well-intentioned, they were flawed. It was, I think the idea behind race-based affirmative action was well-intentioned but flawed. And here's why. I have friends that are black doctors and have kids with a huge economic advantage over my friends that are white and have very little money. Now, it's really not enough that the tutors to my wealthy black doctor friends are going to get. And why should my wealthy black doctor friends' kids have an advantage over those people who, were very poor and happen to be white? It inherently feels unfair if you're behind Rawls Veil and not just looking for what's in your own best advantage. Now, since the 1990s, I've been against race-based affirmative action, which the Supreme Court deemed illegal, but I've been for socioeconomic affirmative action. In the scenario that I gave, my poor white friends would get an advantage over my black doctor friends because their kids are going to have a much harder time because they have so little money. And really what matters is, which, if you really need to have grit and determination, more grit and determination than the black doctor's friends if you're coming from that poorer family. Now, equity is about understanding that to date, Black and Hispanic people historically have had more socioeconomic challenges and been more disadvantaged. Not in all cases, obviously, but in many cases. And so, if you create socioeconomic affirmative action, there will naturally be a race-based slant to it, but it's for equity, which makes it fair. Because
Lynn, you're looking
basically,
very hot tonight.
John Horton, you're about to be evicted. That was John Horton.
yeah, thank you.
You're well, mate.
Jim Wilkinson.
Which one?
That was Jim Wilkinson. There he is.
Oh, well, you're hard, mate. Oh, look at me. You're...
Where are you, Will? There you are. Thanks. I usually make you co-host. You're quick on the draw. So, all right. So, so basically, socioeconomic affirmative action is about understanding, and while there is a racial slant to it right now, the idea is that over time, people who are socioeconomically disadvantaged will rise up and be more successful because they have some slight advantages because of the disadvantage they had from growing up poor. And if they're from average members of their group, and so as they grow financially, successful, then they're no longer going to need that help that they needed when they grew up poor. And so this is fair even when you're behind Rawls Veil to have a socioeconomic preference rather than a race-based preference. Now I'm going to the next slide, which is inclusion. So basically, we want to foster a culture where all individuals feel respected, valued, and integrated into the organizational environment, enabling them to fully participate and contribute. So let's face it, doesn't everybody deserve respect and to be valued for their capabilities? And doesn't everyone deserve to be treated as part of the team? If you think about the last time you were ostracized or left out of a group or that you wanted to be part of, how did that feel? Did it feel fair that you were left out? And is it fair to leave people out because of things they have no control over, like race, sex, etc.? Do you think someone can fully contribute to an organization if they don't feel respected, valued, and integrated into the organizational environment? So some people, and I'll use the socioeconomic situation again, may come from a poor background where in their lives they've never eaten at fine dining establishments. This was the case for me. I grew up pretty poor and I'd never really eaten at a fancy restaurants. For me, McDonald's was a treat as a kid. So usually we made our own food because it was actually a lot cheaper than going out to restaurants, which is why McDonald's was a treat. Now, the other restaurants we went to weren't priced very differently from McDonald's. If you grew up this kind of way, when you graduate college and you're highly motivated and a successful student, you don't really know how to fit into a high class environment. They don't teach you that in college, right? They don't teach socioeconomic training or etiquette at restaurants. You would have to think to yourself to go out and read a book on etiquette, which let's face it, who thinks of that? I certainly didn't. So, really, I can recall getting an interview at Goldman Sachs and showing up in not the beautiful wool coats that everyone else was wearing, but in like a cheap knockoff brand jacket. And while my interviews went very well, I did not get an offer from Goldman Sachs. And I think that my clothing might have had some part in it. And I don't think that they had bad intentions. I think that they understand that they're a place that's at the top of their reputation and they wanted to hire people that would represent them well. However, if they were practicing inclusion, they could have ended up making an offer, but then having a conversation and said, look, we really liked you, but we need to, you remember, we're one of the most prestigious investment banks in the world. You'll want to choose a tire that fits the brand when you work with us. If you can't demonstrate that you don't have, if you can demonstrate that you don't have enough money to do this yourself, we're going to give you a $10,000 signing bonus that other hires don't get in order for you to hire, buy a wardrobe that will help you represent yourself in Goldman Sachs correctly. They could even go further and give etiquette training, right? So that you know how to act at um, the uh, the holiday dinner. So that's the type of response that I hope plate rate managers and HR will be able to do someday. That's how I want to treat people, and that's how I think people should be treated if we're being fair to everybody. So that said, and I hope you don't mind me using myself as an example, you're still welcome to criticize that example as much as you want. I don't want people to feel like they can't criticize anyone. Criticism is very welcome in this community. We just want to do it politely. So that's the only rule. Um, so next slide, basically a short DEI is simply about being fair to all human beings, considering opportunities under Rawls Veil when you're hiring people. So the next slide is that critiques of DEI mostly assert that DEI is not being fair, which is very interesting considering DEI's primary focus is around trying to make things more fair. So let's look into the common critiques one by one and how a reasonable mind might respond to them. So critique number one is that there is a threat to meritocracy. So this one I've heard a number of times. Critics argue that DEI programs may prioritize demographic characteristics over individual qualifications, potentially undermining merit-based systems. But actually, DEI is actually established to do exactly the opposite. It's to make sure everybody has an equal chance as long as they're qualified. People who aren't qualified don't count against the pool of people that are being considered. So the initiatives in DI don't advocate against hiring the most qualified candidate. And by the way, when I say these things, this doesn't mean, and someone mentioned earlier that they were in an organization and someone was working in DEI and they saw things going on that they felt like were unright, like and unfair. That doesn't, what I'm saying tonight does not mean that no one is abusing DEI. There certainly are some people abusing DEI, just like there are certainly people out there robbing banks. But not everybody is a bank robber, and not everybody in DEI is abusing DEI. A lot of people are actually handling it very responsibly, maturely, and in the spirit of what I presented, which is what DEI's intentions are. But like any large initiative that has, at least hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people involved in it, there are going to be a few bad apples. So I just want to clarify that I'm not defending that all people under the DEI banner are all good people. That's impossible. Like, there are people that are in finance jobs that are supposed to be guarding the bank and they're robbing the bank from their company, right? So there's all kinds of people that deviate. But that said, by implementing DEI strategies, it's basically to create a more diverse and equitable workforce, which can lead to increased innovation, better decision making, and improved performance. And the practice is really focused on inclusivity and fairness, trying to hire the best people based on merit while providing equal opportunities for all candidates. So basically, DEI initiatives are meant to help the most qualified candidate get the job. It's not about hiring diversity candidates. Does that mean no one hires diversity candidates? No. I can tell you who hires a diversity candidate, by the way. I think, do I have this in? I knew a person, I'm going to tell the story and I'll skip it if it's in a later slide. I knew a person who was managing someone. They had 10 direct reports. All 10 direct reports were the exact same race as them. And interestingly, they were of a minority race. But the manager is like, look, we need to be fair to all candidates and we need to hire the best candidate every time. And you're hiring all people that look like you. And so they had a conversation about, hey, look, we want a meritocracy, and you need to hire people that are not just looking like you. That person who was only hiring people that looked like them may well hire a diversity candidate to just say, look, I did what you told me, and look, they're incompetent because I hired a bad person that happens to be a diversity candidate. In which case, they're actually going against DEI and the whole spirit of things from the beginning to the end. and they're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy that DEI is bad. That's someone that's in egotism and confirmation bias to the extreme. And so that does happen. I already know stories where it has happened. So, um, what slide am I on? All right, there we go. Okay, so next slide is reverse discrimination. A lot of people see DEI as leading to unfair treatment of majority groups and see it as discriminatory. Actually, DEI is all about finding the most qualified candidate. It's just saying you need to find the most qualified candidate no matter what their characteristics are, no matter what they look like, no matter how they were born. Those things shouldn't play into things. And Neil in the beginning said, I want to hire the most qualified candidate. And guess what, Neil? That's what DEI wants you to do. DEI wants you to hire the most qualified candidate. It does not want you to hire anyone but the most qualified candidate. Now, if you have two equally qualified candidates and one is from a background that you have very little representation from, then, if they're very much on par with each other in terms of skill set, hire the more diverse candidate because otherwise you open yourself up to liability to lawsuits like this guy was doing that hired all people that looked like him, right? So next, all right. So next is political ideology. So sometimes DEI is looked at as enforcing specific political ideologies or promoting political correctness, leading to resistance from those who perceive them as ideological impositions. Actually, while DEI is generally preferred by or proposed and pushed by one party more than the other, it is not at all ideological unless you want to call fairness ideological. And basically, the DI initiatives are really not there to enforce specific political ideologies or political correctness. It's really just there to make sure that things are fair. And so the let me see. So, for example, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression has expressed concerns that mandatory diversity statements in academic settings can function as a political litmus test, potentially infringing on free speech and academic freedom. And I have a link that shows that they are claiming this. So I dug into that and tried to understand why FIRE was thought hiring the most qualified candidates, regardless of factors they can't control, would be against free speech. It turns out that they feel that statements that saying the most qualified candidate should be hired, regardless of factors they can't influence, is an ideological statement and suppresses diverse statements, which is kind of like saying that not hiring a history professor because he or she claims the Holocaust never happened is a suppression of diverse perspectives. Yes, your statement is diverse, but it's factually incorrect and unfair. It goes against our inherent desires to seek truth and to be fair. So I think not hiring a historian for providing an inaccurate view of history is basically saying they're not a qualified candidate in the first place. And so the people who are making this statement that it's suppressing free speech are actually just saying we don't want fairness. And I don't think their diverse view deserves merit because they're actually advocating for unfairness. They're advocating that unfair practices be allowed to persist. So actually, I think there's a big misunderstanding here by FIRE. And similarly, only hiring people who support statements about fair hiring practices is actually proven to not only be more fair, but actually hiring candidates of all backgrounds who are the most qualified. You end up hiring more qualified candidates than you create than that create a more successful organization, which means that it's better for business. And you can see the prior reference to a Forbes article which explains the research on this. I think I have that somewhere else in the notes, but I don't have it exactly right here. I think it was on the earlier slides. So, ineffective training. Research indicates that certain diversity training programs may not achieve their intended outcomes and can sometimes exacerbate biases or create feelings of resentment amongst participants. This actually may be an accurate critique of DEI initiatives. Again, it's really hard to imagine that 100% of DEI trainings were entirely based on fair views of hiring practices, but really it's not one that should make us oppose DEI. What it should do is encourage us to strive to create better trainings that explain what DI really is instead of what some liberals want it to be. Some liberals paint DI into like a race-based affirmative action when that's not really what it is. And so some people in DEI roles may be playing it that way and creating trainings like that, which some people said, hey, I've heard some of the things going on in DEI are not really fair. And it's possible that that's happening. Well, you should speak up to your ombuds person and say, hey, look, I think the person in charge of DEI is not advocating for fairness. And so, and that way, basically, some liberals probably want DEI to be retributive as a way of punishing some demographics in favor of others. That's not what DEI stands for, and business leaders should quickly remove people who teach these kinds of notions from their ranks. Otherwise, they do damage to the entire DEI movement, which is more of a movement about fair hiring practices. And I will say, Republicans, and I've said this at many past events, Republicans are way better at naming initiatives and coming up with taglines. While someone in the beginning said, "Who can possibly oppose DEI?" It's a little bit complicated. Let's pretend Republicans came up with a name for DEI. I think they would call it something like fair hiring practices. Now, let's face it, how can you be against fair hiring practices? But that's really all DEI is. It's about fair hiring practices. And it's about fair hiring and labor practices. Okay, let's extend it a little bit. But, how can you oppose fair hiring and labor practices? And there's really nothing other than fair hiring practices that we've talked about. And I think it creates a much more clear banner that's a lot harder to attack, and in a way that people will immediately reject, anyone that advocates for unfair hiring practices. I think it creates a better banner to stand under. Next slide, which is legal and financial. Legal and financial. So some organizations face legal challenges and financial repercussions related to their DEI policies, leading to a reevaluation or scaling back of such initiatives. I would argue that what liberals should be doing is when the political climate will be open to it, which is not now, with a Republican majority in both the House and Republican president, in both houses and a Republican president, but they should require companies over a certain size to release statistics on the demographics of their employee base in aggregate, you know, as long as the numbers are big enough to be statistically relevant, and compare that with the demographics of other companies in that role. What that would do is create public disclosure showing liberals that they can create lawsuits against companies who have unfair hiring practices. And then actually the liability will be more instead of the liability being for promoting fair practices, the liability will be for promoting unfair practices because people will be called out if they are promoting unfair practices. So that's what I would consider for liberals that have some sort of sway. I think that would be a more solid approach. So next is feelings of exclusion. So DEI efforts can inadvertently make members of majority groups feel excluded or marginalized, particularly if they feel that these initiatives are not encompassing their perspectives. Now, historically, if nobody but white males would be considered for a role in a company, as a white male, you had to compete against only other white males. With DEI, you now have to compete against a larger and more diverse group of candidates to be the best person. If your perspective is that you should have an advantage over more qualified candidates of another race or protected status, I'd argue your perspective should indeed not be encompassed into hiring strategies. It is against DEI, in fact, because what you're promoting is a form of racism or sexism or name whatever ism for whatever qualifications that you have that are historically the ones in that role. Whereas really what we should be promoting is fair hiring and labor practices. Because why shouldn't we hire the most qualified candidate in any given role that we're able to find? Next slide. So far, we've defined DEI as the movement itself defines itself. Then we looked at common critiques of DEI and where they do and do not hold water. Next, we're going to look at how DEI is supported through initiatives and where those initiatives are not promoting fairness. So in one case, implementing practices that hire a diverse workforce. Now that feels fair, right? You want to be able to hire from all types of backgrounds. You don't want to just hire like people from a specific, if you suppose that you had a black CEO and they only hired from, historically black colleges, right? That would feel unfair, right? Then, people in non-historically black colleges would never get a chance at going to that business out of college. So you want to hire from locations that are diverse. So the next thing, going to the next slide, is training and education. So, we talked about training and education, and this is where I was going to give the story about the manager, and I already gave it, so I'm going to keep this one short. But training and education is about raising awareness to people that DEI is about hiring fairly, and it's about helping the best person get the job. It's about meritocracy. That's all of what it's about. And so the critiques that it's not about meritocracy don't are they're creating a straw man argument. And for those who don't know what that means, it means they're criticizing DEI for something that it's not. They're criticizing DEI or a definition of DEI that is not what the people who promote DEI are doing, or what they should be doing. Let's just give the benefit of the doubt of the critic. DEI people should be promoting fairness, and if they're not, you should call that out in your organization, to remove those people from positions of power if they're not promoting fairness. So next is establishing policies that promote equity and prevent discrimination. Well, that promotes fairness, which in the picture we saw, where equity hopefully felt like the fairest, right? Out of the picture that I put the link into in the chat, I would think that the equity was the most fair part of those boxes and the people watching the sports game. So I think that would be good for business because fairness is what has been shown to be the most successful for businesses when they're hiring. The next one is about employee resource groups. So supporting groups that provide community or advocacy for underrepresented employees. Now, I think this type of group is great, but I also think that people outside that group, like let's say the group is for women, people other than women should be allowed in the group as mentors to help people who are in that underrepresented group. So when I was in corporate America, these groups felt like they were exclusive communities, and I wasn't really supposed to be a part of it, which kind of turns into a type of discrimination and makes people feel left out. Rather than make people feel left out, bring them in as advocates, right? Bring them in as people who are going to help the careers of the people who have been historically disadvantaged. Make the conversation about how do we get these people to be, who are historically disadvantaged, to be trained and ready, and how can I be a mentor to you to get you to be ready for the next big role? And how can I talk to my peer who can actually get you into a job doing what you want to do the most? And if you're using it as a way to advocate for the best candidate and to train diverse candidates in areas that historically don't have diversity, that's what these groups should be for. Now, once you have a diverse workforce where, and this is something that could be shown in, and I just thought of this, so it's not in my slide notes. Once you have a workforce that's shown, if we had those government regulations to release what kind of demographics a company has, once you've achieved fairness, then I don't think you need employee resource groups anymore, right? Because you've achieved fairness, unless it comes out of balance again, I don't think it would be necessary. And then you're just all operating on a level playing field. So, and exactly, Mandy, be an ally. So I'm sorry, I don't get to see the chat very much, so I just noticed that one. And so I do get the idea that, people of minority groups want a safe place to talk, but I also think there should be a place for such a thing. But I think that they're responding to unfairness by discriminating against people who are not members of that group is not the best way to approach achieving fairness. I think we should work together to achieve fairness, because how are you going to get into those positions of power if you don't have connections to the people in those positions of power? So I think that being inclusive is the right strategy here, and I don't think it's the one that's always done, unless corporate America has changed. If anyone in the Q&A wants to say if it has, I would welcome that news, but my guess is that it's not. Now, so now the final slide. In the coming months, I'm going to represent my hypothesis on reincarnation, and this is where basically Rawls Veil becomes reality. Like we actually might live in a situation where Rawls Veil really happens. So I'm going to present my hypothesis on reincarnation along with that of heaven and hell, which I don't like have a metaphysical perspective on heaven and hell. I have a different one. And no, I don't want to say that. Come to that lecture if the topic interests you. I'll basically explain how peer-reviewed science and my a priori argument both agree that there's a better chance that we'll be reborn after we die than that we won't be. And so actually it's in our best interest to make society more equitable. So wherever we're reborn, and we can't really control that, right? We can't control what happens to us after death, but something and something does. And I hope conservatives won't mind if I give a little joke, but Donald Trump has basically gained his power and money from inheritance. Despite his inability to grow wealth, he's in the bottom 5% of wealth earners. If you don't know that, put it into ChatGPT and fact check me, but it is actually true. He's in the bottom 5% of wealth earners, which means he's basically an F in class at growing wealth. He's only wealthy because of the money he inherited. And so the person joked that because Trump has had a lot of questionable hiring practices along racial and sexual lines, that he will be reborn as a poor black woman in a country without a proper justice system. And it's possible that he will. And if he does, he basically, I will add, he might be transsexual in his next life. Who knows? Right. And I actually think, and I've talked with a lot of transsexuals about whether or not they choose to be transsexual, and not one has said that they do. So for anyone that thinks transsexuals choose to, we should probably have another event on that and try to, get for people that are gay or trans, talking about whether or not they choose that. And I would just encourage people that are straight, that think that people choose to be gay, ask yourself if you choose to be straight. Because I'll tell you, I asked myself, and there's no way I choose to be straight. I am born straight. That's how I am. I couldn't change it if I wanted to. Totally out of my control. Like nothing I could imagine would change that I'm straight. And the gay people that I've asked this question to and the trans people too say the same thing. But I'm digressing a little bit. So the idea is that if we don't strive for equity and we are reborn into who knows what next life, then, actually, we're going to be reborn into a situation where only someone, and by the way, I will say that I think Trump would be successful if he was born into that black woman's body in a poor place without a justice system. The guy's got persistence. I have to give him, he's got a lot of persistence. He's like 80 years old with a ton of energy. He's got a ton of energy. And so I applaud him for that. He has a lot of energy and persistence, but I think that he would have to turn that energy and persistence in a direction of pursuit of fairness to get himself to a better place. And whether it's in the next life or a future life, I know that he'll eventually do that. We all eventually will get things right. But I highly recommend starting now and not putting it off and just trying to seek truth and be fair. Um, so that said, I want to stick to DEI. I don't want to digress on reincarnation. So don't ask lots of questions about reincarnation. We will do that another night. And I think someone said something about they would like that. So now I want to give it to Margot, who's going to give a good public announcement. So thank you, Margot.
You're very welcome. Hi, everyone. I'm going to share. I'm going to share a document. I'm trying to share a document.
Oh, let me give you hold on one second.
Do you have it?
Well, you are co-host. You are co-host. So you should
Yeah.
be able to share. It's at the bottom of the green up arrow, or
I
it's in
see
board.
that.
Then
But
press
then
that and then
Margot, are you a musician?
I am a musician. How did you guess?
You're that Margot Sargent, huh?
Yes, it's my mother's name. I'm struggling to have access to the document, so
I think it's set for host only, not co-host.
oh, okay.
Oh, is it?
So Garrett, would you like to share the document so I can read it from your desk?
Why don't you just share the link, because we've been having trouble screen sharing, to be honest, and I don't know if there are any Zoom bombers still left. So just in case, I would just share the link in the chat.
Okay.
See if it works now.
Yeah. I should have been more prepared. Hang with
No,
me,
no, you were
guys.
actually very prepared. You did.
I'm not sure about that,
But there's always last minute changes in any kind of first time that you do something. No one gets
Yes.
everything right the first time, is what I'm trying to say.
You are absolutely right. Let me just.
You could just read it too, Margot, if you want.
I've got such a strong French accent.
No, it's great.
I
It's
wouldn't.
great. No, do it. Read it.
Okay. Okay. Let's try that. FTI time and communication disclaimer. We appreciate the time and commitment each of us is making to be here tonight. To ensure everyone gets a chance to participate, we ask that contributions be kept concise and for about 2 minutes per intervention. You are welcome to respond to others as soon as they finish speaking, but please keep replies under 20 or 30 seconds. We'll try to keep back and forth discussions on each topic under 5 minutes, unless there are very few or no hands raised, so everyone has a fair chance to speak. That said, if you have a story that could be a game changer, it's absolutely fine to take a little more time. Just be mindful to give others the same opportunity. I, Margot Sergent, I'm volunteering as a gentle timekeeper for both attendees and presenters, offering a friendly reminder at the 1 minute 30-second mark. Our goal, we want to create a space where introverts, extroverts, new speakers, seasoned speakers, minimalists, and storytellers all have an equal opportunity to be heard. In preparing this time disclaimer, we were inspired to also use this meeting as a space to practice efficient and nonviolent communication. Personally, as an introvert and a fairly sensitive person, musician, learning these skills was life-changing for me. Hope it can be beneficial for you too. Key aspects of efficient and nonviolent communication: clarity, express your thoughts clearly and concisely to avoid misunderstandings. Be open to feedback. If something feels triggering, double check what was actually said before reacting. Clarifying meaning instead of assuming. So make sure to clarify the meaning instead of assuming. Check in with yourself before speaking. Are you reacting from a place of anger, frustration, or resentment? Emotions can blur communication. Respect and awareness of boundaries are key to creating a safe group environment. Empathy and active listening. Let's remember we all come from different backgrounds and experiences. Instead of focusing only on opinions, let's try to understand how someone arrived at their beliefs. Since body language is an important part of active listening, we encourage you to turn on your video and share your name. It helps everyone feel seen and validated. Awareness of bias and constructive thinking. We all have confirmation bias, the tendency to ignore evidence that contradicts our beliefs. Be mindful of this as we introduce new ideas, often supported by strong logic. Instead of thinking in rigid right or wrong terms, especially when it comes to labeling people rather than ideas, let's consider, is this idea constructive or not? Is it beneficial or not? Does it solve problems or create them? Does it bring people together or does it exclude others? Cultural and contextual awareness. While fact-checking is non-negotiable, cultural values and societal norms vary depending on where we were born and the circumstances where we were given to expand and not our perspectives. Final thoughts. Thank you so much for hanging so far with me. We hope this discussion encourages exploration, new perspectives, and deeper questions. And if we leave this meeting with a better ability to express ourselves, well, that's the cherry on the top. Thank you for your attention, and let's start.
Merci beaucoup.
Avec plaisir.
Alyssa, you had your hand up first.
Yes, thank you. I really enjoyed the presentation. I have questions, so I'm just throwing out questions because I don't, but there are things that came up while you were giving the presentation. Then also, I have some, points that Alan Bloom brought up, and I'm interested in people who know more and have a better background, just, taking them out for me or at least shedding some light. So the first.
Alyssa, if it wasn't clear, we want to stick to one question or comment per time you raise your hand. You can raise your hand as many times as you want, but that way we can actually respond to in a reasonable amount of time, that one question at a time. Does that make sense?
Okay, yep. It's just one question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so so my first question, the people with the most advantages, in my mind, would still have an unequal likelihood to meet or to exceed qualifications. Does DEI hiring, or how does DEI hiring resolve an issue that begins before an interview? Right. So I feel like there's a bit of a presumption that, and I mean, that no matter what ground people are coming from, that they're all going to have the same like outcome in the interview, and then therefore it's just discrimination that is the result of the inequity in the hiring process, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, that's my biggest question right now.
So there's two ways in which I can imagine that happening. One, I gave the example of me showing up in a cheap sports jacket to Goldman Sachs, which I'm sure they got a little internal chuckle from. And looking back, I can laugh at myself for doing it. Should have had a nice wool coat. But I didn't know better. And, if they were, like I said, if they were practicing inclusion, they wouldn't have used that to exclude me. And I don't know that they did. Like, I don't have their internal notes or anything, but it's a possibility. So I think that when we do interview someone, we should keep in mind, and not only when we interview someone, but when we're working with someone, we should really give them the benefit of the doubt and do coaching and mentoring when something is not working out right. I think managers are way too quick to just say, forget it. This is not the way that I want it, and therefore I'm not going to work with this person anymore. I think there should be more coaching and mentoring. And the other thing, though, is advantages that come up before someone is even eligible for a job and whether or not they're even a qualified candidate in the first place. And that's where I think we need to look towards socioeconomic affirmative action, starting from an early age, like getting, from high school to college, and even we need to look at our school systems, quite frankly. And we had another event on the school systems, I think, where I basically argued we should not be funding the school systems based on local taxes. My wife and I moved to a very nice neighborhood because we know they have really good schools. Well, if you grow up in a poor neighborhood like I did, we didn't have great schools, right? And so I wanted to give my kids the chance that I didn't get. I did do what I thought would be best for my kids, but I actually will advocate for equal funding for schools across the country so that it's only the participation of the parents that makes the school good, not the amount of funding that they get. So I think your point is really well taken. And all I would say is that it's not just a DEI problem, it's an entire education system problem. Because if you get educated well, then you can get that first good job out of college. And, then it's up to how you negotiate the corporate infrastructure. And then it falls into DEI territory. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I was just, kind of thinking in my mind, if we focused more on the issues that were on the ground, would DEI hiring even be a necessity, right? Like, aside from dealing with the, social issues of there being discrimination or,
Yeah.
racist feelings, but right, like it
That's
seems like the real focus should be on the ground, making sure that people have, equal access to the capacity to have these opportunities, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And that was my big concern with affirmative action is I'm like, okay, well, this seems like it's trying to be more fair, but when do you send an end to affirmative action, right? Race-based affirmative action. And I didn't have a good answer for that. There was no tangible answer. Whereas if you create affirmative action that's socioeconomic, then there is a tangible end when everybody, and this is one of the FTI's very ambitious goals. It won't happen in my lifetime, but I'm trying to start an organization that does it, is that every person on earth makes the equivalent of a modern USD $100,000 a year in the US, adjusted for location, et cetera, et cetera. But if everybody makes that kind of money, then there is no socioeconomic disadvantage because everyone has enough money to get themselves tutors if they want to spend their money on that. So I agree with you. It goes back to earlier. Um, and so, yeah. Does that make sense, Alyssa?
Yes, it does. And now I'm like, I have my second question that follows, but I'll leave it
Okay,
alone.
you're in line. You're gonna get there. Don't worry. We still have
Okay.
55 minutes. So, Abe, how are you? Are you the Abe that used to come? I missed
Yes, I
you.
did. It's a long
Oh, I
time and a
missed you,
good
Abe.
presentation,
It's good to have you
Garrett.
back, buddy.
Garrett, so far you've been only talking about the workplace diversity. I'm
Right.
talking now, I would like to talk about, the quota system in all these Ivy League colleges. Like, so far for the past many years, we have started, I mean, it's only now we have given a quota system to encourage Black and brown people to come into the system. And there is a quota system which has to represent the entire country, demographics. Now, if we start applying DEI to these type of people, you're going to find it's going to be dominated by the Asian community in these colleges. Though, I mean, most of the whites have all, they come in from better neighborhoods. The Black and brown people come from, not all that good neighborhoods. So don't you think sometimes you do need a quota system? I mean, to encourage these people, I mean, to come up. They may not be on level with white people, but, considering where they came from,
Yeah,
they do need a push up.
I get what you're getting at, Abe. I do think that we need, I do think that we need to select for people based on socioeconomic criteria. So, if it's Black and brown people that did grow up in a poor neighborhood, like you were talking about, but my friends that are Black doctors don't deserve an advantage over an Asian person who grew up in a very poor neighborhood. And honestly, the quotas really killed Asian people in my high school. Like Asians in California, like could not get into like the top colleges because everybody that was getting into the top colleges was Asian, and they were like oversubscribed basically because Asians were just like the majority of people in a lot of the top schools, and so it was much harder to get into the top schools if you were Asian. So, but actually, the idea of explicit quotas was made illegal under Regents of the University of California versus I don't know how to pronounce it, BAKKE in 1978. And then again in June of 2023, the Supreme Court said affirmative action programs in college admissions are unconstitutional. So it is not allowed right now by law. You can consider it as one of a number of factors, and that's okay. But I would say part of the reason that that was done is because of what I talked about, which is the perceived unfairness of making it race-based when, the kids could have a huge socioeconomic advantage even if their race is a minority race. And I would argue making the delineation socioeconomic is much fairer than making it race-based. Does that make sense, Abe?
It does. I mean, to a certain extent, yes.
Cool. Paul, how are you?
I'm good, and I have a lot to say on this, but I'm going to make my first point
Yeah.
up front, maybe another one later. So my main objection to the presentation you've given is that DEI is being implemented in exactly the same way as North Korea is implementing their democratic republic. DEI is what DEI does. It's not it's not this dogmatic, ideal, brave new world. It's not this thing that we want it to be. It's what it actually is. And what it actually is extremely discriminatory, and quotas are being used right and left everywhere, virtually everywhere, in colleges, in corporations, in government. And I'll give you a very clear-cut example, and that is Joe Biden, who applied a quota of 1 when before he picked his Supreme Court nomination, he said only Black women need to apply. That's a quota. That's a direct violation of equal protection. That's racist. That's everything you can say. And that's how people perceive DEI in America. And this is what we know it to be, despite the fact that we have all these other things that people say about it, how great it is. The second example is right before the new administration. I was watching all the federal court hearings, and they'd have, they'd come before the committee, and the Republicans would attack them, but they would be overvoted, right? 50-51. It was panel after panel after panel, and I mean, I must have watched 20 of these things of women of color. Virtually no men were being considered for any federal judgeships in the federal government. How can this be equality of opportunity? It simply cannot. My third and last example is just for this comment here. I was sitting here paging through the Fortune 500, and I wanted to see how far down I could get before I found a single man who was the chief in charge of human resources. I finally found one on the 20th corporation on the Fortune 500, the 20th one. The 19 companies, Microsoft, all of them were women. Okay. Again, if only women, virtually only women, are heading up HR departments in corporations, how can this ever be a merit-based system? The math doesn't work. So DEI might be great, you know, if you're a AI computer system and it can implement this fairly and meet all these ideals. But in practice, what we actually see is far, far different. That's not the DEI.
Try to finish the thought. So, no problem. So I'm just doing a quick check at let me see if
Actually, Garrett, while you do the search, I
Go
just
ahead.
wanted to respond that while it could be that there's some voodoo going on with the 19 corporations, but it doesn't surprise me one bit that women are heading HR, because they do have yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into controversy, but they are more attuned to relationships and human resources than men are. So in terms of merit, it's quite possible
That's
that women would have to-
discriminatory. What you just said is discriminatory.
Generalization here?
No,
A stereotype, gender stereotype, maybe?
no.
Well, with the same logic, you could say that
I-
men are better at many other things and we can only hire men. How's that?
no one's saying we can only hire anyone. If
That
he
is
said
not
I think
what-
we need to
we can only
consider
hire,
the talent pool.
just
That-
hold on. If he had said that we can only hire women, that would be discriminatory. He
Right.
just said women have more, you know, and I what I'm looking up is what percentage. So as of 2022, approximately 73.5% of HR workers are women. So only 26.5% of qualified HR candidates are men. So it shouldn't be a surprise that the majority of senior people in the field are women. Now,
Right.
the numbers that you
And
said,
let's-
Paul, I agree are larger than 75%, but I think it would be interesting, and I'll do the check of what percentage are leading HR teams to see if that's different. But I would also encourage you, Paul, while this clearly bothers you, think about for how long was it white men that ran everything in all divisions, all CXOs, and so you're outraged that, oh my gosh, women might be running HR, even though they're 75% of the population of that field, just like men are dominant in computer science. There are far fewer, at least in the US. You know, I was in computer science classes of 300 people, and we had like 10 women, 10 or 15. So, your qualified candidate pool is going to be differently allocated. So that's the first thing. And try to remember everyone to do one thing. The Joe Biden thing, I understand why you're frustrated by that, but you also have to understand the Supreme Court doesn't have a lot of diversity. And the only diversity that has come from qualified candidates, I'm not going to go there because I'm just going to upset you, but I'll just say that.
Well, I'm not upset. I'm happy to be very cold on this topic, but you're going against your entire presentation on DEI when you say
No. I'm not saying that he should have said, I'm only going to hire a black woman. I would agree with you. He should not have said that. He should have looked at all the qualified candidates and hired the most qualified one. But if we're actually going to talk about the Supreme Court next week. So I would encourage you to come and we're going to talk about how qualified the different candidates are and which political party put those candidates in place. So I'm going to put a link for next week's session so that people that want to join can join in.
Well,
There are a lot of hands up. Did someone want to reply?
I just wanted to respond and just clarify for the two commentators who thought there was gender bias. I was simply commenting on the logic and conclusion that said because they were mostly women, that was not based on meritocracy. And I was
Carl,
like, it could be.
Carl, is it black women? Is it white women? Is it Asian
No,
women? Is it
There
brown
is no
women?
bias. I was talking about Paul's comment that because it's mostly 75% women, it is not based on meritocracy.
95% women.
Okay, but the conclusion was it was not based on meritocracy, and my point is that it could be. That's all I said. It could
Not
be.
mathematically. If 75% of human resource workers are women, but 95% of those heading up those departments are women, clearly women are being advanced ahead of men, aren't they? Are they not?
So actually the
Well,
percentage, hold on, let me get the statistics here. I
Yeah.
looked it up. In Fortune 500 companies, approximately 70% of CHROs are women. So actually they are underrepresented in head of HR positions.
All right.
Is
Well, I
that
just went down the first 20, so I didn't do a
but
full.
yeah, but Paul, you got to look at statistics and look at, look to prove yourself wrong, my friend. It's always better when we look to prove ourselves wrong or we ask an objective third party like ChatGPT, give me the statistics, which is what I did for you, is to show you the statistics because I know it felt unfair. And look, Paul, if you were right, I would have said it was unfair. 95% of head of HR should not be all women. That would be discriminatory. I agree. That shows unfair hiring practices. The reality is it's very close. It's close enough that I would say there's no discriminatory action, but if there was any, it's discriminating against women.
Okay, but I did say in the top 20 companies in America, right?
Could
Well, I mean, I looked at the Fortune 500. Those are the 500 best
You
companies in the country.
filed
If
somewhere.
you looked at the 20 that have better SEO, I would argue that maybe they just have better SEO, right? You didn't, you have to look at an objective like sample size scientifically, which is what I did.
That
So
was one of three examples, by the way.
what's that?
That was one of three examples.
Well,
um
I talked about the Biden. You can only give one question or comment at a time. So next time your hand comes up, you were happy to go to your next issue. So Carrie, go ahead.
You're muted.
I thought I unmuted. Sorry. Thank you for that.
Right.
Let's see. So I kind of question the ideology as being outcome driven versus means driven. And here's where it gets questionable is when it's this conversation just before. It depends where you draw the boundaries, right? What the distribution is that you're trying to match. And it sounds like what we're really trying to do is end up with a fractal society where if I look within the United States and I say, well, if there's this percentage of this group of people and that percentage of that, and I want every company to match that distribution in every neighborhood and whatnot, it's almost like what we're doing is it's like busing, except writ across the entire society. The real problem there, I think, is that unequal outcomes are not an indication or a reliable indication of prejudice, right? Some of this stuff can be random, right? That's why in science there's a prohibition against p-hacking, if you're familiar with that term. That's where you look for unequal distributions, assume they're causative, and then go ahead and write a paper on it and say, look, I found this correlation that might be causative. And that's resulted in something like, I don't know, last year, 10,000 papers getting retracted. So I find that an issue. Anyway, I'll let you comment there. We got a lot of people.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. I guess I'm not sure what you're saying. Like I think like in order to like if you're talking about small sample sizes, that are not statistically significant, no one's gonna raise a lawsuit against a company for saying you only have one person in HR and they happen to be a white man, right? Like that's not grounds for a lawsuit. Now, if you have, like we said, 75% of HR people professionals are women and your head of HR and 80% of your HR workforce is men, that's weird, right? That's probably a result of unfair hiring practices. You can't say that just happened, and we could actually come up with a calculation of what's the likelihood of that happening, randomly. And it's actually probably so low that it's worth a lawsuit over.
The problem is that a lot of this stuff doesn't. Hey, if John Rawls is running your system, maybe he would do a good job. But generally speaking, I don't trust people to not be biased, which is why we like to be rules driven, or at least folks on the conservative side argue that that's what they are. Like, look at the example of if I look across the prison population in the United States, less than 10% are women. Is that because the system is sexist? Most people will go, oh no, it's because men commit more crime. And it's like all of a sudden it's like, oh, so we're going to use this system, except in this case, because everyone just knows that that's not an appropriate place and time to use it. Well, everyone has those places where they think, well, in this situation, we should do it this way. And it creates the appearance of a rigged system depending on where you're sitting.
Actually, it's 27.5% of women in jails, but your point is still valid, except I would say that when you talk about jails, you have to talk about the eligible qualified population is people who committed crimes. And so, yes, if women are, 27.5% of the people committing crimes, then 27.5% roughly should be in jail. Now, if it's 30%, if it's 26%, no one's going to complain about that, Carrie. But if you're talking about a certain jail in a certain state that has 80% women in jail, well, something's probably wrong with that, right? Because it doesn't go with the statistics of what crimes are committed across the rest of the country. Just like if you have one company that has 80% men, well,
With
why do
with
you have
your HR
80%?
stats, how do you know who was qualified?
I
You
mean,
just had a representation of folks that were employed.
yeah, that gets into lawsuit territory and you have to prove it, right? And so in order to prove that someone was less someone uh like someone was being racist, you need to like bring that to a court and they look at all the candidates that were looked at, they look at who was looked at for promotions, and it gets into a lot of details of all the details to decide whether or not it's racist or sexist or whatever. And those discrimination laws have existed for a long time. They exist whether DEI exists or not. What the DEI does is it prevents companies from getting sued because they're being racist or sexist. That's all DEI is trying to do is prevent lawsuits for illegal acts.
One way.
I so agree with you, Jared. That is
Thank
so
you.
true.
Thank you, Mike. And it is also trying to promote fairness at the same time, right? Which I was saying the whole time, but the laws are actually there to promote fairness too. So, like they're the same thing. The laws are intended to be fair. They're not always, but they're intended to be fair. So Alyssa, go ahead.
Oh my goodness, that was a whirlwind.
Sorry, I peed with
I
a fire hose, Alyssa. You can tell my style's that way. So
yeah, no, well, I now I'm stuck between wanting to make a comment or to bring up a prior
you
question.
can make a 20 or 30-second comment to the last thing first, and then you can use your hand for your own question or comment after that.
Yeah. So I was kind of somewhat intrigued by, Carrie's position and also in response to Paul, but I think, and never did I think in my life I would bring up a comment by Jordan Peterson public space, but today's the day and they happen. However, I'd listened to an interview once where Jordan Peterson was, critiquing the concept of the wage gap being understood based off of, the metrics that they were using. And he said ultimately, women seem to gravitate towards certain positions or more likely, to be preferred in office jobs or prefer office jobs for themselves, like as of their own volition. And that these other fields that men tend to gravitate towards, are more working in, more laborious positions and often also have an increase in salary. And so he was saying that you can't look at the outcome or say that, this particular situation is unequal based off of the salary if these types of phenomenon are essentially happening on the bottom social level. And that was kind of like when I made some comments in the chat, I was like, well, how many men are interested in pursuing HR, right? How many like HR students are men? If the result, like, where is the problem? If we're just looking at the top of the situation, then we're not going to have like we're not getting a full picture or full scope of the
I hope
circumstances.
this is your full question, right?
No,
Oh, you only had 20 or 30 seconds,
I'm
Alyssa.
sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't paying attention. Okay. All right. I will wait
Um,
again.
so
I
we should
got
do
carried away
another.
with it.
Let me do this. Let me just say, let's do another event on the wage gap because we should talk about wage gap. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what the wage gap means from what you're saying. I think there's
Yeah.
understandings going around. So let me let you ask your other question. I'm not going to respond to that one because we're going to make it another event.
Yeah.
Hey,
Okay. Yeah, no, it
Garrett,
was just oh sorry.
Garrett, did you ever do a presentation on meritocracy?
No, that's a good one, Carl. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a
Margot,
lot of
can you add
a lot of
both of those
misunderstanding
to
as
the
well.
list?
Okay. So my question, my actual question, was going back to my original statement, which was about people who already have, social economic advantage are, in my mind, more likely to meet or to exceed qualifications for jobs. And one of the critiques that, Alan Bloom was making, although this was specifically about the university, was that their way of trying to make things more equal was actually by lowering qualifications. So he was bringing in this concept of leveling, and to what degree that is actually still or potentially still a factor in DEI practices. In order to equalize, we may actually be lowering qualifications or lowering standards.
Well, when you say lowering qualifications and standards, if you're talking about a school like my school was Cornell, right? Cornell gets a lot of applications and doesn't have a super high acceptance rate. But the truth is, probably half of the people that apply to Cornell are qualified. We just don't have enough seats for them. So they've got to be sorted out one way or another, even though a lot of them are a lot more qualified than get in. It doesn't mean you're not qualified because you didn't get in. It means you weren't a fit in that cohort of people based on everything that they were looking at across all factors. They want people from diverse backgrounds, they want people from diverse geographies, diverse parts of the world. And so all of these things factor into an entire class. And sometime I should have someone that I forget who I know that is in this field. But I do know someone that does like interviews at higher ed, but I'm blanking on their name. But anyway, I do think the question is the candidate qualified? But if someone comes from, again, like if you're hiring right out of college and someone came from, a very poor background, I think I gave a pretty good example of how, I came from a very poor background. And so I didn't have some of the skills that I needed to fit in like early on in my career. Luckily, people taught me, right? Like peers taught me and people in in my workplace taught me, but it was nice people who like stepped up and said, "Hey, by the way, you got to do this," right? And people don't always do that for each other. And I like to say, if we don't help each other, who's going to help us? So I think it's important that we all try to lend a helping hand when we see someone not doing something right, politely point it out and say, "Look, I know you mean to do the best you can, but this thing that you're doing may not be socially acceptable in this situation," and point it out to people and let them know. And this is how just basic stuff. So Alyssa, I get your point. I think as long as the candidate is qualified and able to do the job very successfully, I think that understanding that they may have come from a background where they didn't have the advantages that other candidates had is about equity, right? It's about saying, let's treat people fairly and give someone the chance to grow into a role. And I'll tell you, as a hiring manager, I would often choose someone that was less senior, but really hungry to like learn, right? And they may not have the same skills. And it wasn't necessarily about their race, it was about like their capability of doing the job. But being the most skilled candidate is not the only thing you consider as a hiring manager.
But isn't that uh, um, being biased, Garrett? Like you're supposed to hire the qualified person. Your business is supposed to make the maximum amount of money.
I didn't hire someone because of their race, Mike. I said that I would choose people not only based on their strict qualifications now, but on their growth potential. And a leader wants to grow people. A leader wants to make someone else into a leader. And I read all this stuff on leadership where people say there are leaders and followers, and you have to be a good leader. Te amo, mi princesa. You have to be a good leader and you have to lead your followers. And I'm like, no, if you're a good leader, you make other leaders, right? That's what you should be doing is teaching people to lead.
I agree.
And so all I'm saying, Mike, is I would give people a shot. I had someone that was like in the like a clothing salesperson, but when I interviewed her for a BA role, she was like stellar. She asked all the right questions, better than the BAs that I'd worked with, and she was never a BA. But I hired her over other BAs, even though she was less qualified, because she had the skills without even like having done it before. She had better skills than the people who had done it before. So, yes, she was not the most qualified candidate on paper, but based on my interview, she was the most qualified candidate and she killed it. She was like one of our best team members. And, even though she was very junior.
So that brings
Gender remember 7 hands are raised and we have
Yes,
the time
let's go
for
through
6
quickly.
people. Yeah.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. George, thank you, Alyssa, for your question.
Hi. A lot of questions came up as the discussion went on. So I think I want to go back to your definition of equity. Um, I think you mentioned like the proportion of people who are qualified, like what is their demographic proportion, and that should be represented in the workforce. Is that correct?
Roughly, not precisely, but generally. So
Okay.
if 75% of people are in HR are women, then if you have 100 people in HR, somewhere between like 65 and 80 should probably be women, right? Somewhere in that range. I'm
Okay,
making the numbers
that
up,
clears
but
it because I thought it was like a strict
no, no,
number.
no, not a strict number. You can't make strict numbers on these things because, like everybody that's advocating for the most qualified candidate, you want the most qualified candidate. That's what's going to, the person who's going to be the most successful in your organization. And to do that, sometimes there's going to be an imbalance. And, not every data set is statistically significant. Out of 100 people, yeah. So I think I said the point. So, George, thank you for the question. Raise your hand again. I want to keep going through hands quickly. So, Linda.
Linda, I'm calling from the San Francisco Bay Area in California, USA. But I'm originally from Pennsylvania, coal mining town. And so I moved here about 7 years ago. I lived in different parts of the country. And the DEI and a lot of the stuff that I've encountered here is not something that I'd ever heard of before. Gender identity and critical race theory and critical theory and all that stuff. So you're talking about DEI in reference to employment for the most part, which was interesting to hear. It's for preventing lawsuits. But that's another. But my question is I'm finding that here in the Bay Area, and it may be true in much of America and maybe Canada, I'm seeing DEI as taught in schools in K through 12. And I thought maybe you might be talking a little bit about that, but is that something you can kind of make me understand why this would be taught in K through 12 schools, or taught even maybe at the college level, but K through 12?
So, I mean, if remember what I said, DEI is fair hiring and labor practices. So, should fair hiring and labor practices be taught to people? Some people graduate high school and they go into the workforce, right? A lot of people actually, it's not as many people as you'd think that have higher education degrees. And so, for the people that just graduate 12th grade and go in and start working as a plumber or, an electrician or something like that and never get a degree, those people need to know that when they get hired, they shouldn't be discriminated against. And they should be hired in a fair way. And that if they become a hiring manager, they need to hire in a fair way. So let me ask you back, Linda, would you agree that fair hiring and labor practices should be taught to people in, K through 12?
I think it should be taught to people that are going into business professions, maybe in college.
Well,
But
never go to college.
I guess it depends on how it's being taught. I'm
agree
under
with
the
that.
impression, and this is where I'm having a difficult time understanding. I mean, I get the impression that it's taught to kids like how they should be inclusive and
Yeah.
how equity should apply in K through 12. And that doesn't, I don't think it should be taught in school in K through 12. I don't, or at least that.
So let's say a student has to, when I was in high school, I had to buy my college textbooks, right? Because I went to the local college to learn calculus. My school didn't have a calculus class. There were only 4 or 5 of us in calculus my senior year. So let's say I didn't have enough money to buy a calculus book. Should I not take calculus? Do I have to take the same math again the second year because there's no equity? There's no, way that someone could help me because I'm financially, downtrodden. Are you saying that we shouldn't have that kind of fairness? Or is it?
I don't think you're understanding my question. I mean, they're being taught, the kids are being taught that how they should act towards other kids
Right.
in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Right. So do you think that let's say there's a class that's, 90% black and 10% white. Do you think that those white kids should be ostracized and made fun of by the black kids?
I think they should be treated as individuals.
Yeah.
And I
Well, they
don't
should
think
be
there should
respected.
be
That's
any
what,
focus on groups
well, what
within
if,
K through 12. I think that it should be a situational. I don't think there should be formal instruction on how to interact, how kids should interact with each other. It should
you
be
don't think,
done through,
you don't
it should
think,
be done through them doing things wrong.
you don't think we
Or
should teach fairness in school?
I don't know how you teach fairness. It's
That's what
usually a situational,
DEI
it's
is
usually
about
based
teaching
on a
fairness.
situation.
Yeah,
I
DEI
mean,
is about teaching fairness. That's all. That's everything I described. Unless you can point to something that I talked about in the definitions of DEI that you feel like were unfair, I recapped each one and it was all about fairness. It was about being fair. And so I think fairness needs to be taught more. We have such an unfair world. And when I was a kid in middle school, I told my teacher when he gave me a detention for something I didn't do, he goes, "Life's not fair, Garrett." I said, "Yeah, you're right. Life's not fair. There are hurricanes, there are earthquakes, there are natural disasters that, hit some people and not others. Life's not fair, but every one of us gets to make our own decisions. And you get to decide if you want to be fair or not. Don't you think that we, when we make our decisions, should make fair decisions?" So I was advocating for fairness in middle school, and guess what? He dropped my detention because he agreed with me. We should all be fair, and we should be teaching other people to be fair. And the fact that we're not is basically a lack of wisdom.
What was the thing they didn't?
Yeah, well, I don't think we can teach an abstract concept like fairness. Fairness is usually something that's situational. And equity is, I also agree with the other gentleman talked about it, it's outcome oriented. So I just think it's very, very difficult to teach abstract. Kids got to learn, and it seems to me that they should be learning through interacting with other kids. And that's how you learn fairness. And, their parents teach them.
Thank you, Linda. We have a lot of hands up, Linda. I don't mean to cut you off. I appreciate your comments. Thank you for sharing them.
Sure.
Paul, go ahead.
All right. So I maintain the first problem I had with the information you presented, and that is what DEI does is not the definition that you're giving of DEI. My second big complaint is about how qualified is almost always used when you have a large number of applicants in a limited number of positions. Most qualified has a slightly different meaning, and that is the person who has the most skills, the most experience, the most ability, is we generally consider that to be the most qualified. But when you are, let's say, and I'm going to use an example we're all familiar with, let's say you are hiring for positions at the DMV and you have a huge number of applications, and every application you receive on your desk is qualified because it's desk work. It's very simple to train. All these people pass the test. 1,000 people pass the tests. And you are going to apply DEI in that you want to increase representation of lower groups because you think that marginalized groups, excuse me, you think that marginalized groups need more representation in government jobs. So what you do is you take the minorities off of your application list and you give them the jobs first. Okay, and your rationale.
That's against DEI policy, actually. That's illegal.
I think that's just affirmative action.
No, it's not affirmative action. It's illegal discrimination, and it should be sued for. If it happens, Paul, you have the right to sue the government if it happens, and you are applying for that job.
I thought in your presentation you said if you have two equal candidates, then you would pick the one that is the least represented.
Well, what I'm saying is, let's say, in the case of HR, I think you misunderstood me. You were trying to, so let me explain what I actually meant. So what I was saying is, let's say you're talking about HR candidates, which we know are 75% women. If your organization has 65 women in HR and you have two equally qualified candidates, a man and a woman, You should choose the man because otherwise it's going to start to look like discrimination, whether you meant to or not. And statistically speaking, you can calculate a likelihood that it is discrimination. And once you get past 95% likely to be discrimination, I'm sorry, but at that point you deserve to be sued. You have to be a little more careful than that.
So this sounds like equality of outcome, which is definitely not the way you defined equity in this case.
What do you mean by quality of outcome?
Quality of outcome, you're saying that the representation has to match society. In other words, if
The representation of qualified and capable candidates.
okay, yes, that's what this is the point I'm making. And that is if you determine qualified to be a certain bar and you allow enough people to flow over that bar, they're all qualified. If you decide that you're going to put the underrepresented person in that position, you are advocating for equality of outcome and not equality of opportunity.
Paul, let me ask you this. If there was a company and 100% of the employees were black, do you think they wouldn't be sued?
That's the fact they would be sued is not relevant to the conversation.
Because it's not it is because it's not DEI then. If they're doing that and they're changing the bar and saying all the candidates were qualified, so we chose the black one, and they do that 100% of the time, guarantee they'll be sued. Probably by some white supremacist group, but who cares? They should be sued.
It's not supremacist. I saw the Super Bowl.
I'm not saying it's supremacist. I'm saying it's illegal and it's discriminatory what they would be doing if they did that.
Not.
And I would,
Absolutely
it's illegal.
No, it's not. It's not illegal. If you have a company that just happens to be, let's say, a small company.
Paul, please look it up on ChatGPT whether or not that's legal. Give me the prompt you put in and give me the result and ask it whether or not it's legal. I'm going to go to Mike now because we have a lot of hands up and not a lot of time.
Three more people.
Finish my point. You jumped in on top of me before I was able to finish my point.
What was your point? You have to keep it to less than 2 minutes. We have like 8 hands up here.
Now you brought up a separate point. Google was sued by both men and women. The men were claiming men are discriminated against, and the women were claiming the women were discriminated against. So a lawsuit has no bearing on this. If you have
whether you win the lawsuit or not is what has bearing, and whether or not you actually have valid grounds to sue is what we're talking about, not whether or not people did sue. You can sue anyone for anything. Paul, I could sue you for stealing money from me, but that doesn't mean you're going to be found guilty. Of course you wouldn't. You didn't.
How is 100% black workplace against the law?
It's discrimination. It's very clear discrimination if it's a large organization.
How did you determine it was discrimination?
Because the pool of qualified candidates are not all black.
If a sports team, let's say a basketball team, is all black people, should they be?
Sports teams are much smaller, so they're not statistically significant sizes.
Can I jump in now?
The lawsuit. Let me finish right here. So the lawsuit. The lawsuit will be based, according to what you're telling me, on the discrepancy of outcome. We're measuring it only by outcome. That's all I need to say. Thank you.
It's not only by outcome, but go ahead. It's based on qualified candidates, and it's based on the pool of qualified candidates, which is fair hiring practices. So, Mike, go ahead.
So just answer that point. Like 2 days ago, I was watching the Super Bowl ads, and the first thing I said is, why are they all black? And I'm a brown guy. I'm not a white guy. So it kind of offended me that it felt like forced upon me that they all have to be black because of DEI. And where's my rights now?
But what do you mean? Okay. People on an ad? You're saying that DEI impacted on an advertisement?
I'm not a sports guy, but I mean the midtime, like, I don't know the
halftime show.
The halftime show, yeah. Well, they were all black
because it was Lamar Kendrick and all the dancers were.
They were all black. Why is that? I mean, there are white people.
Why do you think that has to do with DEI?
Because they only hire black people. I'm sure white people, brown people like me are good singers and everybody. And I felt really offended.
But pretty sure they're trying to send a message.
Why do you think that has anything to do with DEI at all?
I mean, it's obvious that they want to just show up black people, black faces in front of me because of DEI. I mean, why not brown or white people?
Let me ask a different way, Mike. Please post in the chat a link tying DEI to that hiring practice. Because actually, if they were hiring just to hire black people, it would technically probably be illegal.
Yeah, there's a little, can I just run 10 seconds?
Yeah, go ahead.
A lot of logical fallacies here. I also watch the Super Bowl, and I watch it for the ads. And I don't know if you noticed, but Gronkowski was in like 90% of all the different ads. And I was thinking, oh my God, that's discrimination because they didn't, he had to be hired for that. Do you know what I mean? So logically, and Garrett, it's kind of goes against your point that if you have 100% of something, and it's literally based on a specific like test that shows that they are more qualified, it's not discrimination, even though it seems like it is. You know what I mean? So it's not automatically discrimination because it could be based on merit.
But Carl, I choose my bank accountants as women because they are meticulous and they take their time, and I can trust them more than men, to be honest with you. And I'm a man.
Okay.
So that's not discrimination. But when I
Right.
see that
You're choosing someone because they're a woman, you could end up with a really sloppy female, banker.
and I fired her, by the way.
I told you, like I said, I like to say the only generalization that's generally safe to make is that generalizations are generally unsafe to make.
If I could make a point.
Yeah, if you have a quick response, go ahead. We have a lot of hands up, so.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
Just the halftime show, I think it was more of like they were trying to tell a story like of the Black experience. So obviously they would use like Black singers and Black actors. It's just my point.
George. I didn't watch the Super Bowl. I was at a Edgar Allan Poe speakeasy date night with my wife.
That sounds like fun.
As my daughter said, I don't watch sports, period.
Right. You picked the right time to go out because everybody's into the TVs. Yeah.
All
right, Hussein.
Thank you, George. Let's go to the next person. Hussein. Thank you, Carl.
You're on mute.
You're on mute, Hussein. Yeah. Thanks, Carl.
Hi, thank you for the mic. I'm joining from Canada. In year 2015, Justin Trudeau took power, and he chose his government 50% men and 50% women, and he announced that as a, he said, I think, as far as I remember, he said it's 21st century and we have to do that. Do you think it is a good idea to have 50% men, 50% women, and announce it?
I mean, precisely no, but to say I'm generally going to be fair in hiring practices, and out of the qualified candidates for these roles, I think the qualified candidates are roughly distributed half men and half women, and I'm going to use that type of distribution, I think is actually good, because what he's saying is I'm going to have fair hiring practices, assuming that there's 50% men and women that are qualified for those roles. Now, I didn't research whether or not there were. I'm assuming that there were. If there were not, if it was like 70% of the qualified people were men, he should have said that, right? He should have been fair. Like, I will always advocate for fairness, and DEI at its spirit is supposed to advocate for fairness. I think Paul was pointing out that some companies don't use it that way. And Paul, I will speak out against DEI when it's unfair. 100% of the time, I'll say it's wrong. And the people who are using it the wrong way, we should be criticized and taken out of DEI roles. The only people that should be there are the ones that want to be fair.
So, don't you think it is kind of virtue signaling when you are announcing that? Because,
Think about it this way, Hussein. If 50% of the qualified candidates are men and 50% are women, all he's doing is saying, I'm going to have fair hiring practices. Look at me, I'm fair. I mean, what's wrong with that other than, like some people say, well, now you're, what is it called? You're virtue signaling. And I don't understand why that's a bad thing. If you're telling people you're a good person and then you do it, that's a good thing.
Yeah, if automatically comes out 50% men and women, that's fine. But if you announce it, it gives you, that feeling that he's sending a signal that I am doing that because there is no 50% women, qualified women, and I made it. So that's at the end of the day, I think I myself, I'm first generation immigrant, right? So I think this obsession with numbers, one of the friends said the quantity of outcome. If you go with the numbers, I mean, if you're obsessed with the numbers, it's basically at the end of the day, it hurts those minorities, those groups that you want to empower, right? I do my job. I'm very good at my job. I don't want people to look at me because I am an immigrant or because of some kind of DEI policies. I got the job. I want whenever I see a woman or a colored person somewhere, I want to make sure that that person is qualified. I think
Yeah,
it
but that's all I
applies to
said
myself
DEI
as
was
well.
about, right? I just said DEI is only about making sure the most qualified candidate gets hired. That's what it's about, and it's about not discriminating. All it's
Yeah,
trying
but
to do is prevent discrimination and give everybody an equal chance. I mean, if you grew up really poor, don't you think you deserve a little extra? You're an immigrant. You probably didn't have huge amounts of money growing up. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm just guessing. But if you didn't have huge amounts of money growing up, your kids probably were at a disadvantage against the people who were at the top tier of wealth, right? The dynastic wealth people who had tutors, when the kids were 6 years old, were starting to get tutored, right? You don't have that advantage in your family. So your family and your kids should have a little bit of an advantage when getting into colleges over those people who had tutors since they were 6 years old. Does that make sense?
that makes sense as long as the these policies in long run doesn't make people feel, that is unfair.
Oh,
If
people are going to
somebody,
feel it's unfair. But the interesting thing is, all it's advocating for is fairness. And yet, people who are privileged are saying it's unfair because they don't have their privilege anymore. And I don't like the word privilege, quite frankly. And so I'm using it in this case very sparingly. But the truth is, if you were, and I gave this example, if you were in a protected role of being a white man, where historically the leadership roles were all white men and the rank and file were all white men, you were only competing against white men, and that's not fair, right? You should be competing against the diverse workforce, and the most talented person should win. And that's all DEI is saying, is that the most capable person should win.
All right,
I
we only have
understand.
6 minutes left.
Yeah, let's
Let's move
keep
on.
going. Mandy,
Mandy.
go ahead. Thanks, Hossein.
Hi, thank you. I was going to say that you can't, when you force these kinds of things, this DUI business, oh no, sorry, DEI business,
Yeah.
it's not going to come out very well. You have to, I had a bunch of notes and then there was so much talking that went on. Yeah, you can't force a DUI. It has to come organically, and organically it has to come through spirit. You have to be spiritually understanding of how the world works in order for this to happen. I grew up poor. I'm an immigrant. Of course I'm going to face racism. Why wouldn't I? Because that's part and parcel of my evolution here, right? I'm going to learn from that. And when I learn from that, I mean, years ago when I was younger, no, I wouldn't learn the lesson. But when I dealt with it a few times, I understood that it was for me. Everything happens on the inside of me. So the DUI business, I've come as an immigrant here. But if I went back to my country, I can get any job I want. Right?
So try to
So
finish
do
your
you
thought.
see how as we are here, we're not learning all okay, I'm not learning my lesson if I'm going to keep banging on
Let me ask
about
this,
not getting
Mandy,
this
like
job and that
if
job.
if people had not treated you with racism and discrimination, would you have been happier and would you still have been successful
It depends on what lessons I'm here to learn.
in
And
this
as
life?
I learn those lessons,
You mean in this life?
yeah, in this life, like in a
Aren't
previous
are
life,
there ways to learn it other than being discriminated against? Whatever the
no,
lessons are.
you have to experience it. You have to experience it. And if you sit with it and try to understand it and connect, of course, with your ancestors, then you have a better understanding, right?
Yeah, but if you sit with it and understand it, then you would say, I don't want to do this to other people. And
Yeah,
that's what
that's it.
DEI is saying, is let's
No,
not do this to other people. It's
DUI is playing
institutionalizing.
God.
No.
DUI is
Where
playing God. Let me,
what slide did I present that made you feel like DEI was playing God?
oh God, I don't know. It just came to me just like that. I was having I had a sip of tea and all of a
I think
sudden,
you're getting emotional, Mandy. Calm down, take a deep breath.
Let's move on.
Let's go to the next person. Say Jong. Yes.
Oh yeah. Hello. But God, I hate saying this, um, but just almost to like just reiterate real quick, just like I said in the beginning, this conversation becomes so hard because even though you gave these slides, and the way I'm sorry, you can feel free to correct me. But we're talking about DEI, we're not talking about like DIB or DEIA or ID, there's these other things we might think about. And within that conversation, we're talking about it like specifically, in regards to like employment and like job hiring practices, where some people might be thinking about it more in that philosophical sense. Some people may think about how it's being taught in school. Some people, so we have all these ideas, and it just, it's like I said, I think it's kind of like Wittgenstein kind of playing language games, and that's kind of making this whole thing
Yeah.
kind of tricky, because we have
Does.
these competing ideas in our head, and it's like, oh, no one understands what I'm saying. It's like, well, yeah,
Yeah.
because we haven't agreed to what we're talking about yet. That's why
Yeah.
we're fighting over
Yeah,
all
no, I
this
agree
stuff.
with you. I think that most of what we're arguing about is about semantics. And if we just simply said all DI is fair hiring and labor practices, what do you have against that, right? What's wrong with fair hiring and labor practices? And by the way, it's illegal to not have fair hiring and labor practices already, and it still is, even with discrimination being gone, it's still illegal not to have fair hiring and labor practices. So all this is doing is saying be compliant with the law and go a little extra further and take into consideration people's background and where they're coming from when you're considering them for roles or in an educational system. So, Carly, we haven't heard from you. How are you?
I'm tired, but I'm well, thank you.
Thanks.
This is fascinating conversation. I guess my question was is that somebody mentioned Wittgenstein and the whole language problem, and I've been contemplating that for a long time, as far as the language that can be used can be co-opted by people, and
Yes.
language constantly changes, etc. That said, I heard of somebody saying that in their company, they just simply changed the name of the department and it still does the same thing and avoided the problem. My
Yes.
question is, when it isn't, basically, if we do have companies that do hire whoever they want based on, the name on the application, irrespective of the gender, or, sort of the inferences that can be made about things that people might be discriminatory against. If a company were to do that, how would that be actually monitored? I mean, saying that somebody might have a right to sue, my opinion is that we live in an over litigious society as it is. And I need to sue somebody, but it's a hard process to do. So again, that might play into the kind of socioeconomic problems that we have of who can actually sue when they're wronged by something or not. So
Right.
is it that capitalism or what might sort of police these companies, or how does that work?
No, that's exactly why I propose that when our government gets into a more hospitable direction to this idea, is that companies should, of certain sizes should have mandatory reporting requirements to say what, whether or not they are within, norms, like within like expected norms of percentages of people in different types of roles. So for example, if you have 75% of HR candidates are men, right? Something's clearly wrong there when 75% of the pool of candidates are women. If you have 75% men, you have some hiring practice problems, right? Because you can't say that all those men were all more qualified than all the women that were competing.
Yeah, and I understand the principle behind it. My
Yeah.
question is that who polices the companies, like,
Well, that's
especially
why,
when they're self-reporting?
in the same way that people are currently suing companies for having DEI programs, companies should be able to be sued for having a bad, like, layout of candidates, meaning like basically showing that this in this reporting process that I'm imagining, we would be able to, like, third parties would be able to see, someone like the ACLU, who I don't like very much anymore because of their Citizens United stance. But people like that will come out and just find legal resources to sue people who are discriminating.
Okay, so how do we enforce the self-reporting of companies? I guess that's my question.
We need government to mandate that, and right now
Okay,
that's not going to happen.
cool. Thank you.
No problem. And also, actually, you know what? There is a way to do it, Carly. I just thought of it. We can actually tell companies to self-report these things, and if they don't self-report them, we boycott them. Just don't buy from them, right? If they're not willing to show that they don't discriminate, we should all be able to agree that on the right and the left. if someone is not showing that, they're not willing to show that they don't discriminate and that they're not doing something illegal, right? If there's nothing to hide, just show your diverse workforce.
So I understand that the transparency aspect sounds great, but again, coalescing people to boycott stuff, again, I'm overwhelmed with messages every day in my email about where I should put my energy or not, right? Yeah. But is there a way that we as a society or company can sort of ensure that that reporting is accurate, let alone actually done?
Well, that would have to be like people are whistleblowers for stuff like that. If it makes you feel better, Carly, I have over 900 unread emails, so I'm also feeling a little overwhelmed. And some of them are from a week ago. So
well, thank you. I see there are 4 other hands up too on that notion.
Yeah,
so
let's go to the next one, Jenna.
And then we're gonna Jenna and Citrine, since we heard from Carrie and Paul.
Yes, that'd be great. Good idea, Carl. Jenna, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks for the presentation, Garrett. I just wanted to comment to Mike H was saying earlier about the halftime show. I think you have your own agency to discern yourself from not seeing the things that you don't want to see. So you could also just skip the halftime show. And the negative reinforcement through the racism that the lady was saying earlier. I think it could be a catalyst for developing empathy and also anti-racist belief, but it could be also lead to someone to be a racist. So it's a two sides of the coin. And then with the fairness regarding a lady saying that fairness is an abstract idea. So that if I understood it correctly, that she is not seeing the point of being taught of that into children. I think that while it is an abstract idea, I think they are also readily apparent for young children, and the challenge is it's not the abstractness, but rather the approach for teaching it. And like, I guess like dismissing the possibility of teaching fairness because it's abstract. It's like saying that we shouldn't teach empathy because it's an emotion, and we shouldn't teach honesty because it's a value. So they are all abstract concepts, yet their absence is it's instantly recognizable, and their presence is profoundly impactful.
Jenna,
so I
you
guess
have to
like
come back, Jenna. I'm not going to let you not come back. That was
a great point.
Good response to what that I forget who it was saying.
But
and
we
you
used
much
to
better responding to it than me. But go ahead, Mandy.
Yeah, we used to learn these kinds of things in Sunday school, right? Not Bible school, but Sunday school taught us empathy, caring. You know,
Not everybody goes to Sunday school. I never did. So no one taught me.
That's why you're missing it. Thank you.
All right, Citrine, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to piggyback on the fairness factor with Linda and Jenna. Yes, you have to teach these things to our kids. I mean, just falling upon something, especially in a society that's based upon such inequality. I mean, I'm a Black biracial woman. My ancestors had to fight for civil rights. That's just the basic fundamentals of any human being should have civil rights. So that says a lot right there. Yep. And then if you read Howard Zinn's A People's Country, America, I forget the title, his book on the inequality and how this country was established, it's right there in your face. As far as Mandy, I wanted to piggyback on her situation with regards to what's going on inside of her, our personal evolution as we enter into this realm of existence with our epigenetics. Yes, we come in with certain things we have to overcome. But there is extreme unfairness in this country. So, you know what I'm saying? Like there's karma to pay, and then there's things to overcome and mature and evolve. And then there's bullshit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And there's
100% know what you're saying.
Extreme. You know what I'm saying? It's just extreme.
Because I like.
So that's what I wanted to say. Basically, I think DEI is great. I'm an older person, so I won't be in it as much, I guess.
Well, you are actually, you're not allowed to be discriminated against when you're older. And I can tell you, as I'm getting older, and a lot of my peers are now older, we do get discriminated against.
Yeah,
As
my
you
daughter
start to get
told me.
older, you get discriminated against in the workforce. If you're not, it's like up or out. If you're not super senior, you're not going to get a good job.
Yeah,
And
I'm 62, and she saw my gray hair as my daughter, and she was like, "Wow, your hair is gray." I'm like,
yeah,
but isn't this supposed to go gray? Yours is
yeah,
gonna go
it
gray."
does. That's a good sign. That means you're living a long time, right? So
Well,
it's a good
hopefully,
sign.
I'll be here when Social Security goes out another 5 years. I'll be out.
Let's find a way for you to make money. So
Okay, Gary, thank
reach
you.
out to me if you want that, and I might be able to help. I have a bunch of ways of making money, and part of the Freethinker Institute's goal is to get everyone to that six-figure modern salary. And so I want to let Ginny go, and then we're going to close out because I'm 7 minutes after when I told my kids I would put them to sleep. So
Okay,
Ginny, go
thanks.
ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, all I want to say, Garrett, as always, for a fantastic topic and the meeting. And just want to say good night to you and your lovely daughters. Okay,
Thank
thank you
you. I appreciate that.
for
And
everything. Okay,
Carrie and
good
Paul, if you guys are open to it, please join the online community. Paul, if you go to freethinkerinstitute.org, there's a link. We have a Discord community. I'd love to continue the conversation. There's a special place to talk about the Tuesday night meetup. So I want to hear the rest of what you had to say, Paul and Carrie. So thank you all for the diverse perspectives. Thank you all for listening with an open mind. I really appreciate it. You guys are just an amazing community. So thank you, Margot, for helping moderate. Much appreciated. And hope everyone has a great night, and hope you come next week to talk about the Supreme Court, which we touched on today.
Great.
We'll get into it in more detail next week.
Okay, good night.
Bye-bye.